This is a tutorial on how to use Microsoft Excel to do a chi-squared test. So a chi-squared test is trying to show whether data fit a model, or another way to think about that is if two things are independent of each other. So I'm going to use an example that's described really well on the BioNinja webpage. The link is in the description below if you want to read this in detail. So what this experiment is trying to find association between two different species of scallop. And what they did is they measured 50 quadrats and determined if one, the other, or both or neither of these scallop species were present in that sample. So their data is categorical, which is important for a chi-squared test, and we're going to find out if these scallop species tend to associate, or if they have no influence on each other, or if they have a negative association, they tend to avoid each other. So this is the data table after taking all of their samples, and you'll see that there's 6 quadrats with both species. So if we're reading this table, the king scallop is present, queen scallop is present, that's this 6. There's 15 quadrats where it's only the king scallop is present, but the queen scallop is absent. There's 20 where the queen scallop is the only scallop present, and there's 9 where neither species is present. So that's how we read this, and that's where we're going to start. So we're going to just type those values into a table on Excel, and if you download this data set that's linked in the description, you can just open up this page. We're going to start right here. So the first thing we need to do is calculate our totals. Now, we could read them off the web page, but if you're doing your own data collection, you'll need to calculate these totals. So I'm just going to add these up. This is equal to the sum of these two. And to save myself some time, I'm going to copy this formula over to the next column here. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that all the way over to the total column, because I'll need that later. So 15 and 9 is 24. And I'm using formulas for really simple math here, because if I change my data, or if I want to use this setup for other data, I don't have to, oops, this is the sum. I don't have to recalculate these every time. So if I leave these formulas in here, I can change these data around. If I do a different experiment or repeat this experiment, I don't have to do all my calculations again. Okay, so these are the total queen scallops present and total king scallops present and absent, and then the grand total. So we did 50 total measurements, so this is the grand total. Now, these are our measured results, and the way the chi-squared works is we're going to calculate the difference between the measured and the expected. So the next thing we have to do is calculate how many scallops we expected to see. It may not be real intuitive. You may think, well, we did 50, we kind of expect an equal number in each one, and so we should just put 12.5 in each of these, and that's not the case. And that has to do with the fact, first of all, there's more queen scallops present and then king scallops, and the way you calculate that is for any of these boxes. So we're going to try and find the expected value of both the king and the queen scallop being present. And you take the total of this column, so 26, times the total of this row, 21, divided by the grand total, 50. So let's calculate that out. Is equal to 26 times 21 divided by 50. Now again, this is really simple math, but if I set it up this way, I can change my data and have the calculations done already. So we're going to go around and do that for each of these 4 boxes. In the absent, it's going to be 26 times in this case 29, we're going to cross this row, again divided by 50. For this one, it's 24 times 21 divided by 50. Oh, I want to put in this cell instead of actually typing in 50, in case that's a different number in my next experiment. 24 times 29 divided by 50. Okay, so these are my expected values. I could go ahead and label that, and you should if you're going to present this table. But let's jump ahead and do the actual chi-squared test. The formula, I'm just picking a random cell to do this in, is CHISQ.test, open parentheses. And the first thing it asks for is the actual range, so these are the observed values. And I'm going to highlight these 4 cells, semicolon, expected range, and that's what we just calculated. And hit enter. Now, this is the p-value of your chi-squared test. So the null hypothesis of our chi-squared, should have probably done that ahead of time, is that there is no difference between the expected and actual values. That is to say, where the queen scallops happen to be is independent or has nothing to do with where the king scallops tend to be. So we tend to find them equally together and apart. That would be the null hypothesis. Let's just write that down so we don't forget it. The null hypothesis, there is no difference between observed and expected, or the species are independent. Those are 2 ways to think about that. Then you'll recall the p-value is the probability of getting these measurements or more extreme, given that the null hypothesis is true. So with a really low p-value, if we're below 0.05, we can reject the null hypothesis. That means, based on this statistical test, that there is an association between these two. And if we look at our data, we notice there are fewer cases where they're both present, which means there's a negative association, which means most of the time, if you're finding a king scallop, they're going to be in a different quadrat than the queen scallops. So you can interpret that, again, based on the biology. You know, are these 2 different scallops using different niches in their habitat and therefore found in different places, localized? Are they competing for resources and therefore pushing each other out? There could be a number of different biological explanations for this negative association, but this is the statistical test to show me that these aren't very likely to be due to random chance, that there seems to be something biologically going on here. So that's how you do a chi-squared test in Excel.